الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا عليم. Today we are going to take the second part of the Tajweed series. It's going to be focused on the Qalb and Ikhfaa of Nun al-Sakinah and Tanween. Last time you did basically the introduction into Tajweed, what is Tajweed, how do you study it and stuff like that, and then you started with al-Izhar of Noon and al-Idgham of Noon. If you know, we're gonna go through a slight just revision just to make sure that we remember what was talked about the first time. Do you remember what was al-Izhar? Anyone remembers? Did everyone here? Did you guys attend the last time? Yeah. Do you remember anything about al-Izhar? Yeah. So al-Izhar was basically how when you clarify the noon. So you pronounce it very clearly without playing around with it, basically. And it comes when the letter after it is a throat letter. So that's the hamza, ha, ayn, ha, ghain, kha. Right? So if you have a noon sakin or tanween and after it is one of these letters, you will basically fully show the noon without hiding it, without playing around with it. Okay? On the other hand, like an example of it would be like man amana, right? Man amana. You would say it man amana. You wouldn't play around with the noon whatsoever because after it is a hamza. Okay. On the other hand, you afterwards took al-idgham, and al-idgham literally means to insert something into something else or to mix them together. So the idea here is basically the noon at the, which will be the first letter, and then the second letter would be the letter that noon will be inserted into. And once it's inserted into it, it basically kind of completely vanishes, except in some cases where the ghunna will remain, right? And that's the only thing that remains. The ghunna, the other letter will become shadda basically. So هذا mimman, for example, min and man, you would pronounce it mimman. There's no noon, and you would give it the ghunna, so it would be like mimman, right? Because the ghunna remains in this case. And you took that, you know, the letters were yarmalun, so ya, ra, mim, lam, waw, and noon. And with the lam and ra, there's no ghunna in Hafs and Asim. And otherwise, in the yanmu, which is the ya, noon, and mim, and waw, there is ghunna. And that was basically, generally speaking, what you took last time. So this time we will talk about al-Iqlab and al-Ikhfaa. Now usually in most books they will be taken as Iqlab first and Ikhfaa second, but we will flip them and we will start with Ikhfaa and then Iqlab for reasons that will be clarified once we start basically. So Bismillah, al-Ikhfaa. So Ikhfaa in Arabic literally just means to cover something, right? Akhfa means to hide it, to cover it, right? Applied, so what does it mean in Tajweed specifically? It means to pronounce the letter in a way that is between Izhar and Idgham. You know, Idgham, it completely disappears. In Izhar, it is completely apparent. In Ikhfa, it's a middle between them, right? It's a middle ground between them where basically a hint of the letter remains without it being too clear, right? It's usually, and it will be associated with a ghunna as well. So there will be the long nasal sound, that is ghunna. Okay? So let's talk about like what do we mean as a middle between ikhfa and a middle between izhar and idgham in this basically table over here, right? So when you're doing izhar, basically you're doing it talking completely normally. And so you will do movement, your mouth will move, or your tongue will move for every single thing you pronounce. So for example, man amana, you will see that man amana. There's one movement for the noon, man, and another movement for the hamza, amana. That's two movements, okay? On the other hand, with idgham, we go mimman. There was only one movement here, mimman, okay? So you understand the difference of how with idgham you have two movements, with idgham you have one movement, with izhar you have two movements. The other way to compare them is the first letter. In izhar, the first letter is completely audible. Man amana, completely audible. In noon is completely audible, right? Man amana. In idgham, mimman, the noon is completely away. You can't hear it whatsoever, right? And so this is basically the two extremes. Ikhfa takes one from here and one from here. So a example of it, man ja'a, right? Man ja'a, here. What happens here is that you're doing one movement, just like you were doing it with idgham, man ja'a. There's only one movement here. But you can hear a slight sound that represents the noon. It's not majja'a, that is completely idgham. No, you go man ja'a. You kind of hear that there used to be a noon there. There was a hint of a noon. Okay? And this is why we kind of consider it a middle ground between the idhar and idgham. Does this make sense? Are we following? Okay. So another way that basically my sheikh and his sheikh as well, apparently we both study under the same sheikh, described it, is that you're kind of dressing up the noon in the dress of another letter. So when you're pronouncing the noon, rather than pronouncing it like a real noon, the noon comes from its position in the mouth, etc. You're pronouncing it while your mouth is kind of shaped for another letter. So while your mouth is shaped for a jim, you're pronouncing the noon. Manja, manja, right? Your mouth is kind of ready to say a jim, but it's giving some time for something that sounds like a noon. Okay? And this is basically like a few hints and points for you to understand what you're supposed to target whenever you want to say ikhfa or pronounce ikhfa. We'll talk about it more once we get to examples, of course. But usually, from my students, basically, most students that I've taught, they struggle with ikhfa or just with the concept of ikhfa. And so a lot of times it is this specifically ikhfa that actually needs training for someone to understand how to do. Idgham is clear, it's just shadda. Idhar is clear, it's just pronounce it as is. Ikhfa is kind of, there's a bit of a trick behind it. There's a bit of a, actual process for you to do, and it needs for you to train for you to get very good at. Now, its letters, you can, so it's going to be all the remaining letters other than the letters of idhar, idgham, and iqlab, which we haven't mentioned. Iqlab only has one letter, which is ba, and then you have the letters of idhar, which are the letters of the halq, and the letters of idgham, which are yarmalun. So everything else goes for ikhfa. Another way to memorize them is through this poetry line. This poetry line, every first letter of these words is one of the letters of ikhfa. So we're saying صف ذا ثنا, so صاد ذال ثاء. صف ذا ثنا كم جاد شخص قد سما دم طيبا زد في تقا ضع ظالما. Right? So every first letter of these is one of the letters of ikhfa. Okay? So we have 15 letters in total. And because ikhfa is, as I said, it's basically the noon dressing up in the kind of the dress of another letter or another sound, you kind of will pronounce it differently based on what the other sound is, because you're dressing it up in that other sound. So you kind of actually need to train on every single one of them to know how each one of them should be pronounced. Now, all of them will have the same, basically, step-by-step approach, but this step-by-step approach will be specialized for each one of them, basically. So going through them one by one, I will pronounce it first, and then I would like one of you to repeat after me, or if you want everyone here to repeat after me. But we'll touch upon it bit by bit. I want to explain a few things on them. So the first one is sad, harf al-sad, right? So with sad, this is the word mansura. You will pronounce it something like mansura, mansura. Can you repeat it? A bit louder, please. All right. So the few things to note, basically, how are you going to play around with this? First of all, the best way I can describe for someone to do it, step-by-step approach, is you're going to say the meme normally, ma, and then you will kind of position your mouth to be in the position for the harf al-sad. Your mouth will be positioned for the sad, but you will give yourself a period of that nasal sound that we always name al-ghunna, that nasal sound. You will allow basically yourself to breathe a bit to prepare yourself to pronounce the next letter. So rather than going mansura, which I hear some students do, mansura or mansura, no, you want to give yourself some time just to allow yourself to pronounce it correctly. So we go mansura, the nasal sound is important. You need to pronounce that nasal sound. It is part of why it's ikhfa and not anything else. And in this example in particular, do we know anything about tafkhim and tarqiq? No. We haven't taken anything in tafkhim and tarqiq, right? So there are letters for tafkhim and letters for tarqiq. What are tafkhim and tarqiq? Basically speaking, it's the difference between a ta and a ta, right? Everything between ta and a ta is basically the same, except that ta is muraqqaq and ta is mufakham. Okay? So when you want to do something mufakham, literally means, like, if I want to like explain or like translate it in English, mufakham is kind of enlarged or echoey. Basically, the idea it is you're turning your mouth to a certain extent to an echo chamber whenever you say a harf that is mufakham. Okay, so difference between at your mouth is like very simple, very smooth. Out, there's an echo inside of your mouth. Same go with, so the ahraf al tafkhim are khussa, daghtin, qidh. The hardest letter in the Arabic language, basically speaking. Every letter that you hear the racist stereotype speak, that's it. Those are the letters of التفخيم. So khussa, daghtin, qidh, right? So all of these are tafkhim. Why am I speaking about this? You'll take a class later on about like a sifat, which the traits of letters, which one of them is a tafkhim. But the reason I'm saying it here is that the noon, when it is in ikhfa, if the letter after it is a letter of tafkhim, it will also be mufakham, or like the ghunna will be mufakham. So rather than saying something like in this example, you're saying mansura, so that ghunna is taking that tafkhim from the sad. The alternative would be something like mansura, mansura. That is not correct. It sounds wrong. It sounds like you are forcing yourself to make it smooth or make it, light, while it's supposed to follow the sad in how it is. Okay? Does this make sense? Yes. Are you following? Hello. So that is in this example. So the things that I kind of want you to understand or very, very much follow basically are, let's see, two things right now, right? How to pronounce ikhfa is basically you're pronouncing this ghunna while your mouth is preparing itself to pronounce the next letter. So your mouth will be in the shape for the next letter while you're making the sound of ghunna. And if the next letter is a mufakham, khussa daghtin qidh, the noon or the ghunna will be mufakham. Otherwise, it will be muraqqaq, like the thing after it. All the other letters other than khussa daghtin qidh are muraqqaq. Okay? Simple as that. So let's practice the tanween one. So birihin sarsar. Let's do the dhal. Tunzirhum. So I want to just ask one person, since we talked last time about how each one of these is written in the Quran, right? What do you think is the sign of ikhfa in the Quran, in the Mus'haf? From what you see in the, do you see the image well? Yeah, does anyone know? Like from the back? So there is no sign on the noon. The noon will be completely bare. And the letter after it will have a haraka without a shadda. So it's similar to how, which letters, do you remember which letters in the idgham also have almost exactly the same look? Al-waw wal-ya. So waw and ya have the same look, which is noon is bare, and then the waw and ya have just a haraka, not a shadda. And same goes here. So with the waw wal ya with idgham and all the letters of ikhfa, they have the same look basically. Okay? So let's do al-tanween. Azizun. Azizun dhun intiqam. You'll notice in this one. What's up?
Can we go over the step by step one more time?
Sure. So when going the step by step for this one, Azizun dhun intiqam, you're going to go Azizun normally, but that noon you will not pronounce it. So you'll go Azizun, and you'll immediately put your mouth basically in the shape of the dhal. So how do you pronounce dhal? Dhu. You're going to basically kind of constrict your mouth. The tongue is at the teeth upstairs basically, and you'll go azizun. Your mouth is already ready for that, but during that duration you're going to do a ghunna basically. So azizun dhu, azizun dhu. Can you try?
go straight from the zai straight to the dal without going
Yes.
to the
You go straight from the zai to the dal without going through basically the organ of pronunciation for the noon. All right. You're going to skip the origin of the noon and go immediately for the dal. Make sense? So can you try again? Azizun dhu. Yeah. And you can notice that even in intiqam, that's another ikhfa, by the way, between the noon and the ta. So intiqam. Can you repeat? Are we following? Hello. طيب with الثاء والأنثى ماء ثجاجا. So here again, it's almost the same exact location for the dal. The tha and the dal have the same exact location, so it will sound very similar. ماء ث. Your tongue is kind of like ready on the same location for the dal, and then it goes from there with the tha. Okay. Now al-kaf is a special one. So so there's one thing to mention basically, and one thing to understand all the ahkam al-noon that we talked about is that the letters of ahkam al-noon kind of rely basically on what organ is pronouncing them from the mouth, basically, right? And so when we say al-idhar are the letters of the throat, you'll notice that the noon is pronounced with the tongue and the upper of the palate, right? Right here, noon. Okay? The letters of al-idhar are the letters of the throat. That's like the furthest thing away from the noon, right? N is over here, letters of the throat over here. So that's the furthest thing away. While when you look at al-idgham, yarmaloon, all of them are very close to the noon. And that's why the noon can completely insert itself in them and completely disappear. While with letters of the throat, you can't hide the noon in them because they're just so far away that it would sound unnatural. Okay? And it's just easier to pronounce the noon and then go for the throat. While it is difficult to pronounce the noon and then go for a ra. They're so close to each other that you're going to basically slip and fall inside of your mouth. And this is what the old Arabs used to do. The old Arabs, these things were things that they would do during their speech because it was easier for them to say, whatever they were saying. It's easier to say mimman than saying minman. No one says minman, right? But it's easier to say mimman. It's natural. And so the reason why I'm saying this is that there's two letters in particular that are letters of ikhfa that are quite far away from the noon. And those are the kaf and the qaf. Both of these come from kind of the soft palate, or like the junction of the soft palate and the hard palate with the back of the tongue, right? Try aq and ak, and you'll see that your tongue, the back of the tongue, is touching your soft palate, basically. Can you try ak and aq? Aq. You'll see that it's very much in the soft palate. And so it's pretty far away from the noon. And this is why, with these two in particular, when you're doing al-ikhfa, you're kind of not even going to pronounce anything from the noon. We keep saying that, there's a slight audible noon that is coming up with ikhfa. And these two, none of that. So it's going to go minkum. There's no noon. Can you try minkum? Right? So you want to avoid making a slight noon sound whenever you're doing the kaf and the qaf.
So no space.
Yeah?
No space between the tongue and the articulation point of it.
Yeah, so you're going to basically, you're going to touch your tongue to the articulation area of the kaf and the qaf. So, minkum, your tongue is basically pressing. It's ready. Minkum. Let's do, so can you repeat after me? Minkum. Can you act out the mistake basically?
Okay, so the mistake is leaving a space. So minkum.
Yeah, so that's the mistake would be something like minkum.
Leaving a large space between the tongue
Mhm.
and the articulation point, which is at the
Soft
junction
palate.
between the soft and hard palate.
Yeah, the distinction between soft and hard
So
palate.
the kaf and qaf, obviously, as you said, it's an exception.
Mhm.
You have to touch the articulation point.
Does this make sense?
Also, the uncle, for example.
Yeah. So one of the things that one of our colleagues said that they didn't understand this point at all until their sheikh basically told them, just pronounce the word uncle. When you say uncle, do you say an N? Is there an N in there anywhere? No. Because naturally any human being just doesn't like to say a noon and after it's a kaf. So we just say akal basically, but we say uncle.
With a nasal sound.
with a nasal sound, just to indicate that there was a noon once upon a time, right? Does that make sense? So just say uncle, but rather than that, just extend that nasal sound like uncle. It's the same thing. Minkum. All right? Go for the Tanween one. Kiraman katibin. What's up? So kiraman katibin. Just to knock it out, since we're talking about it, let's do Qaf. Min qabl. No noon, right? Min qabl. Shay'in qadir. The difference between Qaf and Kaf is with Qaf you're going to do tafkhim, while with Kaf there's no tafkhim. You know, khussa, daghtan, qid, right? Yeah, so you're going to make an echo chamber of your mouth when you're saying min qabl, while with Kaf you're saying minkum. It's kind of cute, you know. Kaf is more of a cute one, while Qaf you're kind of going, you know, min qabl. That's one. The Qaf is in the back even more, so it's soft palate only, while the Kaf is soft hard palate. I mean, everyone here can pronounce a Kaf, right? It's K. While the Qaf might be a bit more difficult for some people, but you kind of want to just push a bit back. And well, with Kaf, air goes out, basically. That's one of the things that is different between Kaf and Qaf. With Qaf, there's no air, while with Kaf, there's air. That's kind of like differences. Any other differences?
Most حتى in الكاف المتحركة, the vowel كاف, you don't really kind of hear much of the air that's being said.
Yeah.
It's usually more in the كاف is second.
Yeah, of course. Qaf is qalqala, of course. But here we won't have like iltiqa sakinain. You know, we'll have a noon sakin and then a qaf. Rarely would you need it. Yes. Are you following until now?
Yes.
I'm asking the back. Are you following?
Yes.
Hello. طيب. So let's do الجيم. أن جاءه. One thing to note about the jim in the Arabic language is that it's not a J. It's not ja'a or ja'a. It's ja'a. You need to kind of like close your mouth first and push out the sound. All right? So it's ja'a and not ja'a. Can you try like it's an ja'a? Do you understand like the difference between ja and ja basically? That's a slight difference. It's basically because al-jim is it's shadida and mujhara. So when we explain it, basically from the location that you end when you're doing sukoon, it's the location that you start when you're doing fatha, right? So in sukoon you're gonna go aj. So that's where you start from a fatha. So ja, rather than aj. You're not gonna say aj. You're saying aj. So you're gonna go ja.
So kind of constrict the
Yeah, you're gonna constrict the mouth a bit more and then open it, and that's really how it's really different from sheen, right? Otherwise, like ja can easily be sha if you're like you just basically a slight push and it's basically a sha. Like this is a bit advanced, so don't worry about that. But he was just curious about that point. Let's go about sheen. Min shay.
Min shay.
شيء شهيد الإنسان. This is one of the easiest ones to go for the next basically origin of articulation, because the scene is just so easy to go for. So you can easily go from ins, and you rest your mouth in the location of the scene. Insan. Your teeth are kind of touching already, basically. Yeah, إنسان خمسة سادسهم. Alright, a few more. We have a dal, so من دون وكأسا دهاقا. Yeah. The articulation point of the dal is the tip of the tongue with the root of the teeth, the frontal teeth. right?
So dal and
It's the
ta.
same with dal, ta, and ta. So dal, ta, ta, and ta will have a similar sound, but the ta will be different because it is mufakham. So the difference between min dun and an tabaq. So try an tabaq. كشجرة طيبة. It's a bit difficult when you have before it a kasra and then you want to go for tafkhim. So again, allow yourself time to breathe during al-ghunna just to fix your mouth into a correct position. The Quran, a lot of people struggle with the idea, I think it was mentioned in the previous point of periods basically during a previous lecture, I think periods in the Quran, like how long each letter takes and stuff like that. If you give every letter its time to breathe, you'll get rhythm in the Quran, you'll get the proper rhythm of the Quran, and you will get you will be able to pronounce the letters much better. You'll be able to pronounce the letter much more beautiful, basically. It is very important for you to understand these azmina, we call them, of each letter. And they make everything so much easier, basically. And that's why we usually recommend anyone who's starting to train on reading the Quran to read it as slow as possible, right? This is why everyone who, when you have a mushaf murattal, they're reading like a meter an hour. They are very, very slow in reading, and that's because they want to show you how every letter should be pronounced exactly. And then once you practice it, once you perfect it, you can kind of play around with it and start pronouncing it correctly and quickly. But you need to start from a slow start, right? When I started with my sheikh, I would read barely 2 pages a day. Like 2 pages a day, and I would feel exhausted. I would be like dead by the end of it. Now I'm reading with him like 5 pages only because of time constraint. Like otherwise, I could finish 10 pages easily with him. But that's the thing. Like you really need to start out slow and steady, but consistent. And once you practice, you'll be able to do better. Let's try to pick up the pace a bit with the zai. Al-munzilun. نفسا زكية. أنفسكم. So here this is a letter from the lips, right? So you're going to prepare your mouth in the position for the lips. The fa. Yes, what's up?
When the letter before the noon has a dhamma,
Yes.
are you supposed to keep your lips first, or you
Bring it back to its original.
I usually bring it back to the original. I feel like that's the more. I remember that's what I eventually figured out with my sheikh, basically. And no, just return back to the natural state before going into the next one. This period of the ghunna is basically a period of you stabilize your mouth to the natural state and then go for the next letter.
what would the difference be, for example, in al-munzilun, if you keep it first or not?
So it will be munzilun or munzilun. The difference between munzilun, yeah, the sound is going to be more constricted. A good sheikh would be able to tell what you're doing while closing their eyes, basically, just because they know that sound only comes out if you are closing your mouth, basically. And that's not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to keep it. You're supposed to stabilize it and return it to its original state before going for the next letter. Let's do تبعا فهل. So are we understanding basically what are the things that you need to kind of follow whenever you're doing al-ikhfaa? طيب, let's go for the next one. من تفاوت. حلية تلبسونها. Nice. Next one is ضاد. So ضاد has a few, it's one of these letters that a lot of people have difficulty with. We have ضاد and ضاء, and those are different letters, of course. Different articulation points. So ضاء is the same as a fa, same as a ذال, while ضاء is unique in its articulation point, which is kind of like the sides of your palate with the sides of your teeth with your tongue going all the way from the back to the front. You will take it. I'm sure the person whoever is taking the traits and the makharij lecture is going to spend like half an hour on ضاد alone, basically. But yeah, the important thing is whenever you're saying ضاد is not a dal mufakham. right? It is not a dal mufakham. A dal mufakham sounds like ad. That's a dal mufakham, right? A dad sounds like al. That's a very different sound. Very, very different sound. But I hear a lot of people say, well, a dad is just a dal mufakham. It's not like it's unique. No, it is very unique. That's why we call the lugha al-Arabiyya lughat al-dad, because it is unique, right? So there's a difference between da and da. Da is a thing that does not exist in the Arabic language, by the way. Da doesn't exist in the Arabic language. That's a Russian thing. In our language, it is da. So your tongue is kind of going to entirely just press on the upper palate with its, the pressure basically being on the side with the teeth. So da. You kind of want to push it out from the back to the front. And we'll talk more about it throughout the sessions, definitely. So try al for me.
Al.
Hello. Now let's go mawdud. Right. Qismatun dhiza. Lovely. And then al is just a dal mufakham. that one is easy. So it's just unzur. So you have the, just fakhimha, it becomes the, basically. The, adh, av. So unzur. Quran zahira. Are we good with al-ikhfa?
Yes.
Do you feel like you can practice it more going forward? Inshallah. Now here's just a last part that we want to keep in mind about, again, a comparison between idhar, ikhfa and idgham. So there's a lingual part of the noon and there's a nasal part of the noon, right? You can call it lingual, you can call it oral, it's fine. And there's the nasal. The lingual or the oral part is what you hear, the na. Na. This is the lingual part. The nasal part is the ghunna, the this sound, right? So in idhar, you will hear both of them. It will go man amana, man amana. The noon is there and the nasal sound always follows the noon, okay? In idgham, both are absent. Both are absent, like for example, allam, right? Allam. There's no ghunna and there's no noon, right? The reason why in mimman there's a ghunna, it's because the ghunna is coming from the mim, not from the noon. It's coming from the second letter, okay? So in idgham, the nasal part and the lingual part of the first noon are gone. In idhar, the nasal part and the lingual part of the first noon is present. In ikhfa, the lingual part is gone because we only have like a slight sound. It's not like it's a real sound. But the nasal part, the ghunna, is present and it's very clear, right? It is kamila, not the maximum amount, but it's basically a 3 out of 4. So, again, it is basically, in any of these examples, min tafawut. The noon itself, the lingual part, not really there, but the nasal part is very present. Okay? So that is basically it for al-ikhfa. Now you might think, whoa, we barely have 5 minutes for al-iqlab. Believe me, it's very, very fair for al-iqlab. Because al-iqlab is basically a ikhfa that is just hiding around. It's a double ikhfa here. So what are we talking about with al-iqlab? Does anyone have questions for ikhfa first? Any questions? Yes.
When you say the noon,
Yes.
you could prolong it for how long?
So the prolongation is supposed to be 2 harakas, right? A 2 haraka is basically like, depending on how you're reading, right? It's going to change from one pace to another. If you're reading very quickly, it's going to be very short. If you're reading very slowly, it's going to be longer. But it's all relative to each other, right? Now, yeah, so the 2 harakas, it's the same as al-madd al-tabi'i, like qala, right? It's the same as that time. So the same as qala min ba'di. Okay? But of course, if you're reading very slowly, that qala might go qala, and that would become min ba'di. That's completely fair. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. Generally speaking, they say, one haraka is a time of 1 fatha, basically. So ma. So ma. That's a 2 haraka, kind of, basically. طيب. So now going for iqlab. Iqlab or qalb, depending on what book you're reading, basically, literally means to change something from one state to another. All right, qalb is literally upside down, basically. We use it in that regard in Arabic in this day and age. It's just flipping something upside down. Now, in the applied meaning, we have a noon sakinah, right? We're going to change it from a noon sakinah to a mim sakinah whenever it meets up with a ba. So harf al-ba, if you have a noon sakinah and after is a ba, you take this noon sakinah, you say thank you, goodbye, and you put a mim sakinah in its place. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, one thing to know about mim sakinah, which is going to come to next session, basically, next week inshallah, is whenever the mim sakinah has a ba in front of it, you do ikhfa on the mim. We already took what ikhfa is, right? It's a state between idghar and idgham. So here what will happen is you'll take this noon, change it into a mim, and then take this mim and hide it. Okay? Does that make sense? It's kind of a two-step process that you'll finish in one step. Okay? So a very common example is mim ba'd. Right? You hear it, you don't say a noon, nobody says a noon, nobody says min ba'd. Even in colloquial speech, you'll say min ba'd.
But there's ambar.
Ambar,
Whenever
yes.
you say ambar,
Every-
automatically you do it.
Everyone writes ambar with a meme at this point. Like so many people write ambar with a meme. No, it's a noon. It's a anbar. But no one will say anbar. It's ambar. Ambar. That's naturally how you say it. Even in English. By the way, like I know this basically. The Japanese language only has the only letter that is stationary, that is sukun, is N. They have an N, but it also doubles for an M whenever there's a B after it. That's it in the Japanese language. It's doubles for an M. It's an N and an M, but only pronounced as an M when there's a ba after it. In the Japanese language, for example. That shows like every language, every tongue in the world will never pronounce an N and then a B after it.
I guess the reason for that is because at the end of the meme,
Mhm.
the articulation point of the meme is the lips.
Lips.
So when you code and you do the meme, your lips are closed.
Yep.
And when you want to start the ba, you open your lips.
Yeah.
But the end of the meme and the start of the ba is literally the same
Yep.
articulation point.
And
it's way easier.
It's
just
so
to-
convenient.
Yeah.
And that's really how linguistics are studied. It's always like things are changed from the rule to something else. Then they ask, why did it change from a rule to something else? And the answer is always the same. It's just easier. There is a reason why everyone says, people here say Allah as a dha. It's because it's easier. You may think that, but in the Levant, nobody says dha. Everyone says dha, right? You'll look at the words that have dha in the Levant, they're all dad, right? And that is one thing that is like, some people feel one letter is easier than the other letter. What matters is just go for what is easier. That's what happens in a lot of colloquial speech. And this is what's happening over here. That noon is changing into a meme because it's easier. And then you are going to do ikhfa on that meme. Okay? So that
Obviously we don't apply our own
Yeah.
accent to that.
Yeah, we don't apply our own accents to the Quran, but it's always important. It's very cool, basically, to understand where does the Arabic colloquial speech come from, basically. And so there's one thing to note about the ikhfa of a meme. We already explained how does the ikhfa of a noon happen, right? And we said that it's different between every single letter. Well, meme only has one letter, the ba. So there's only one way to do it, which is going to be, rather than saying where you kind of press on your lips, you're just going to do it very, very lightly. You go meme, meme. You hear a meme. There is a meme, but it's not like a fully fledged meme. It's just kind of a hiding meme. It's kind of a 2 out of 3 meme, right? Or a 1 out of 3 meme. Meme bad. Okay? You're not going to, there are some people that will say, leave a space between your lips, leave the space of a paper between your lips. All of these things are kind of like just inventions, basically. They're kind of inventions trying to explain something that is naturally easy for a human being to do. Okay? And so all you need to do is, rather than saying mim ba'd, where you're closing your mouth, you say mim ba'd, where there's like a slight open and slight, pressing between the lips. Does that make sense? Can we practice? Let's do amburika. Of course, there's a ghunna as well, because this is a meme. So ghunna. Ambihum. سميع بصير جزاء بما شيء بصير. So from what you see, what is the sign of the Qalb in the Mus'haf? It's a meme. So if it's a tanween, rather than 2 harakat, you'll have 1 haraka, 1 meme, and it's a meme that isn't connected. The meme that is connected is a sign of stopping. The meme that is not connected is a sign of iqlab.
Only pronounce when you continuously recite.
Yes.
When you stop,
And that's another point that is important. Like if you stop at min, you're gonna say min. You're not gonna say mim. Right? If you stop at min, you're gonna say min. If you continue, you're gonna say mim ba'd. Okay? And then the when it's not a tanween, so when it's hada, rather than a sukoon, you put a mim. Okay? Now we were supposed to do like a practice session, but there's no time. It's already 1 o'clock.
the next session.
Inshallah.
The next session,
Inshallah, we'll do.
with the review of the class.
Yes. If anyone has any questions, just real quickly. Otherwise, we're done, inshallah. Thank you everyone for attending, and hope you all benefited. So, I'll stop the recording here.